Carol came back on Tuesday. She arrived at 10:15, which is 15 minutes after Norma, which I have come to understand is a deliberate arrangement on Norma's part. She arrives first, makes the coffee, and then Carol arrives, so that the house already feels occupied rather than empty when the second person walks in. I noticed this on the second Tuesday. By the third, I understood it was intentional. Norma does not do things by accident. She does things without explaining them, which is different. Carol brought a small container of something she called Richard's oatmeal cookies, she said. He had made them every Sunday for 46 years, and she had finally, in the 14th month, learned the recipe from the card he kept in the kitchen drawer. She set them on the table. Norma immediately took one without asking. Carol said, "They're not quite right yet. I'm still adjusting." He had a note on the recipe card that said, "More vanilla than it says." "I don't know how much more." Norma said, "They're fine." "They taste like cookies," Carol said. "They're supposed to taste like Richard's cookies." "That's a different thing," Norma said. "I'm not sure cookies can taste like a person." Carol looked at her with the patient expression I was becoming familiar with. She said, "No, you're right. I know, it's something to work toward." I understood what she meant. Not because the cookies tasted like Richard. Because the trying to get them right was a way of being in contact with him. A way of continuing a conversation with someone who was no longer there to have it with you. The recipe card in the drawer with his handwriting on it. More vanilla than it says. The specific, particular instruction of a man who had been perfecting something for 46 years and wanted to make sure it continued to be done correctly after he was gone. He knew she would find the card. He left the note for her. That, I thought, was a man who understood the Tuesday morning. Who understood that the small continuations, the recipes, the routines, the ordinary things that carry a person forward into the days after the loss, those are not sentimental indulgences. They are structure. They are the scaffolding that holds the continuing life in shape, while the grief does its work. I took a cookie. They were good. Not exactly right, maybe, but good. The question Carol asked, and why it stopped me. We had been talking for about an hour, the comfortable, ranging conversation of people who have established an ease with each other without entirely intending to, when Carol said something that changed the quality of the room. She had been telling me about Richard, about the specifics of him, the engineering mind, the 6 cacti bought as a challenge, the habit of reading instruction manuals for things that didn't require instruction manuals because he wanted to understand how everything worked. She spoke about him the way people speak about someone they have been learning to hold as a memory rather than a presence, with the specific careful attention of someone who is trying to keep the edges sharp, who understands that memory is erosive and is working against the erosion by repeating the details to herself and, now, to other people. And then she stopped mid-sentence. She looked at me. She said, "Can I ask you something? Something that might be too personal." I told her she could ask. She said, "Do you have regrets about Margaret? Not the large ones. I think everyone has the large ones. I mean the specific ones. The ones that live in ordinary moments." I sat with that question for a moment, because it was not a small question. It was the kind of question that arrives in the mouth of the right person at the right table and requires a real answer. Not the managed version, not the answer that presents the grief in an acceptable shape, but the actual thing, examined directly. I told her yes. She said, "Tell me one, if you want to." I thought about which one to tell her, not because there was only one. There were many, and I have spent 3 years developing a specific and detailed knowledge of their individual shapes and weights. But because I wanted to give her the one that was most useful, the one that might illuminate something for her about Richard, the one that a woman 14 months into the loss of a 46-year marriage could actually use, I told her about the mornings, and what I did with them. For most of our marriage, Margaret woke up before me, not dramatically earlier, 20, 30 minutes, but consistently. She was a person who woke with intention, who moved from sleep to consciousness, without the long negotiation that the transition required from me. She would be up and in the kitchen and past the first cup before I had fully decided to be awake. This meant that most of our mornings began with me arriving somewhere she already was. She would be at the table with a newspaper, or standing at the counter looking at the garden through the window, and I would come in and pour my coffee and sit down, and the morning would begin with a version of connection. The two of us, in the same kitchen, in the same light, in the early quiet before the day asserted itself. And I treated those mornings for 30 years as a transition, as the space between sleep and the day's work, something to be moved through rather than inhabited. I was present in the kitchen the way you are present in a waiting room, physically there, mind already somewhere else, already assembling what the day required, what the department needed, what had to be addressed before the afternoon. Margaret was in the kitchen. I was already at the hospital. There were mornings. I can count them now, and the counting is itself a form of regret. There were mornings when she said something. Not urgently. Not with the weight of something that demanded attention. Something ordinary. An observation about the garden. Something she had read in the paper. A thought she had just had. The small conversational offering of a person who is awake and present and in the same room as someone they love. And I responded. I answered. I said the thing that acknowledged I had heard her. But I was not there. She knew I was not there. She always knew. I understood that completely. Only in retrospect. Only after the 2008 conversation when she told me, without accusation and without performance, that she had been lonely in a full house for a long time. She was not describing the evenings or the weekends or the large failures of availability. She was describing the mornings when she was in the kitchen and I was already gone. My regret is not dramatic. It is not a single terrible moment. It is 30 years of mornings in which I was physically present and psychologically absent. And the woman who made the coffee and watched the garden and said something small into the quiet of the kitchen, said it to a man who was not fully there to receive it. That is my specific regret. The mornings. Carol was quiet when I finished. Then she said, Richard read the paper every morning, front to back. He took 45 minutes with it, minimum. And I used to be impatient with that. I used to think he was wasting the morning on something he could catch up on any time. I used to find things to do in other rooms while he read. She looked at the table. She said, what I would give now for 45 minutes in the same room with him reading the paper. She said it quietly, with the specific precision of a person who has located the exact coordinates of a regret and is naming it accurately for the first time. I told her I understood that completely. She said, how do you live with it? The specific ones, the ordinary regrets. And that question, how do you live with it, was the one I most needed to answer. Not just for Carol, for the people listening. For anyone who has arrived at an honest accounting of the ordinary failures of a shared life and is trying to understand what to do with what the accounting reveals. How you live with the ordinary regrets. I want to talk about this carefully, because I think it is the place where the most important and the most difficult work of loss actually lives. The large regrets are, in a paradoxical way, easier to carry. The large ones have a clear shape. You can name them, examine them, bring them to a therapist or a priest or a trusted friend, and lay them out on the table and work with them. They are legible. They present themselves as problems to be processed. The ordinary regrets are different. They don't have a clear shape. They are diffuse. They live in the texture of ordinary days, and they arrive not as single memories, but as a quality, a flavor, to use Ruth's word, that saturates the retrospective experience of a marriage or a friendship or a family, and makes it difficult to know exactly what you are grieving when you grieve it. I am grieving the mornings. But which morning? All of them. 30 years of them. The specific morning is indistinguishable from the general pattern. And the general pattern is not a thing you can hold in your hands and examine. It is simply the shape of what was. So how do you live with it? I have arrived, after 3 years of working on this question, at 3 things that are not solutions. I want to be clear that there is no solution. There is only the integration I described last week, but that are, in my experience, the most honest and most useful responses to the ordinary regrets. The first is accuracy. Not every morning was a failure. Not every morning was me already at the hospital while Margaret stood in the kitchen. There were mornings. I can recall them specifically. They have the particular vividness of things that were exceptions to a pattern. When I was there, when I was fully in the kitchen, fully in the quiet, fully in the small conversation about the garden, or the paper, or whatever she had been thinking about. When I was present in the way that she had always wanted, and that I was capable of, and that I too rarely chose. Those mornings existed. They were real. And the accurate accounting of a marriage includes them alongside the mornings I have been describing. The regret does not erase what was. It sits alongside what was. And the full picture, the 30 years of both, the presence and the absence, the coffee made faithfully for 41 years, and the mind that was sometimes elsewhere when she tried to speak into the morning quiet. The full picture is more complicated and more honest than either the guilt or the idealization alone. Accuracy means holding both. The second thing is directionality. The regret, once named and carried accurately, needs somewhere to go. It cannot simply sit in the interior of a person doing nothing. It will either be suppressed, which produces what it produces, or it will be generative. And the most useful place to direct it is forward, not backward into the marriage that cannot be changed. Forward into the life that is still available, toward the people who are still here, toward the ordinary mornings that are still occurring, in other kitchens, for other people who are in the position I was in, physically present, psychologically absent, treating the small offerings of the person they love as background rather than foreground. Every conversation I have had on this channel has been, in part, an act of directing the regret forward. Every time I describe the morning problem and someone listening recognizes themselves in it and changes something about tomorrow morning, that is the regret doing something useful. It is not resolved. It is redirected. And the redirecting is the closest thing available to repair. The third thing is the hardest. Forgiveness, not from the person you lost. Margaret gave me that in the letter, and I told you about that last week, and I am still working on receiving it fully. But from yourself. This is the hardest, because the self is the most demanding judge and the least persuadable by argument. You can tell yourself accurately that you were doing what you knew how to do at the time. That the pattern of absence was not malice but training. The training of a physician, of a generation, of a particular kind of man who had been taught that providing was the primary expression of love and had not been taught the vocabulary of the other expressions. You can tell yourself all of that, and it is true. And the self does not care. The self has the specific morning. The one when she said something and you were already gone. The one you cannot go back to. What I have found, slowly, imperfectly, with Norma's considerable if unintentional help, is that the self eventually responds not to argument, but to evidence. Evidence that the pattern has changed. Evidence that the person who was absent in those mornings is capable of being present in these ones. Evidence accumulated over ordinary days. The back porch, the 2 cups, the garden, the Tuesdays. That demonstrates to the self that is watching that the lesson was learned. Even if it was learned late. Even if it was learned in the hardest way available. The self eventually credits the evidence. It takes time. It takes more time than seems reasonable. But it credits it. What Ruth taught me about the direction of regret. I told Carol about Ruth, the patient I described last week, who had been managing her grief so carefully that her body eventually overruled the management. But I did not tell Carol what happened after Ruth left the department that first time. I want to tell you now, because the after is the instruction. Ruth went to see the grief counselor I recommended. She spent several months doing the work she had been avoiding, actually experiencing the grief rather than managing its presentation for the comfort of the people around her. It was, as she told me when she came back a year later, considerably harder than the management had been. But it had a different output, she said. When I was managing it, I was always behind it. I was always catching up to it, trying to stay one step ahead of it, trying to make sure it didn't show in ways that would worry my children. It was exhausting, and the exhaustion had a particular quality. It was the exhaustion of maintenance, of keeping something contained that wanted to expand. She said, when I stopped managing it and started actually feeling it, the exhaustion changed. It became the exhaustion of real work rather than maintenance. And real work, even when it's hard, leaves something behind. Maintenance just leaves you back where you started. She paused. She said, and the other thing that happened, the thing I didn't expect, was that the regret changed shape. I asked her what she meant. She said, when I was managing the grief, the regret was mostly about Thomas, about things I wished I'd done differently with him, said differently. The small failures of 48 years. I was sitting with those alone, and they were getting larger. The way things get larger in a sealed space. She said, when I started talking about it, really talking, with the counselor and then eventually with my daughter, the regret started to have somewhere to go. I could describe it to someone else and they could reflect it back, and it would come back smaller. Not gone, just smaller. And instead of being pointed entirely backward at Thomas and the marriage and what couldn't be changed, it started turning forward toward my daughter, who I hadn't been fully present for in the months of management, toward my granddaughter, who was 7 and who deserved a grandmother who was actually in the room when she was there. She said, the grief became useful. That surprised me more than anything. The grief became useful. I have thought about that phrase a great deal since Ruth said it, because it captures something I had experienced but had not found the words for. The specific transformation that happens when grief, instead of being managed or suppressed or moved away from, is integrated into the forward motion of a life and begins to inform it. The grief becomes the instruction, not indefinitely, not at full intensity forever. The grief does change over time. It does become different, if not easier, and the instruction it delivers becomes something you have received and are acting on, rather than something you are perpetually in the act of receiving. But for the years when it is most present, it is also most useful, and the people who make themselves available to its usefulness who let it teach them something about the mornings they still have. Those people emerge from the process differently than the people who spent the same years trying to get behind it. The conversation Carol and I had about Richard's paper. I want to come back to Carol because she said something at the end of Tuesday that I have been carrying all week. We had been talking for a long time. The cookies were half gone. Norma had been responsible for most of the deficit, though she had shown admirable restraint given her general approach to available food. The conversation had gone to places I had not anticipated, the way good conversations go, not where you planned, but where the thing actually needed to go. Carol said, "I've been thinking about what you said about the mornings, about being physically present and mentally somewhere else." I told her it was one of the clearest regrets I had. She said, "I did the same thing. Not with the mornings. Our mornings worked. But with the evenings." Richard came home from work for 30 years and he wanted to tell me about his day. The engineering of it, the problem he had solved or hadn't solved. And She stopped. She looked at the cookies. I was not always interested in the engineering of it. I had my own day, and I would listen mostly, but I wasn't always fully listening. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "After he died, I found a notebook he kept. He was an engineer. He wrote everything down. Problems, solutions, observations. And there was a section in the notebook where he had written down, over several years, things he had told me that he was proud of. Work things mostly. Small solutions to small problems. And next to some of them, not all of them, maybe a third, he had written in the margin, 'Carol understood this one.' She looked at me. She said, he was keeping track of the times I actually listened. Not as a judgment. I don't think it was a judgment. I think it was just, those were the ones that mattered to him. The ones where he explained something, and I was actually there. And he wanted to remember them." She said it without tears, with the clear-eyed quality of a woman who has been sitting with something long enough that she can look at it directly. She said, "I want to be a Carol understood this one person. I just don't have anyone to be it for anymore." I told her that what she had just done, sitting at this table and describing the notebook and what it meant, was itself being that person. That the understanding was not only available in the direction of Richard, it was available in the direction of anyone she chose to be fully present for. Her daughter, her grandchildren, the people in her life who were still there and still explaining things, and still at some level keeping track of the time she was actually in the room. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "You're right." She said it in the specific tone of someone who needed to hear a thing and received it and is now going to do something with it. What the notebooks teach us. I want to stay with Richard's notebook for a moment because I think it contains something important that is worth unpacking. Richard was an engineer. He solved problems by writing them down, examining them clearly, testing solutions. This was the structure of his professional mind. He brought it home with him, the way all of us bring our professional structures home. I brought mine, the diagnostic framework, the habit of looking for the pattern in the data, which is useful in an emergency department and produces a certain kind of husband. Richard brought the notebook, and in the notebook, among the engineering problems and their solutions, he kept track of the moments when the person he loved was actually there. Carol understood this. 1. A small notation. A private record. Not a judgment. A treasure. The record of the times the connection was real. I have been thinking about what that notebook reveals about what human beings most need from each other. Not the grand occasions, not the speeches and the gestures, the ordinary comprehension, the being understood. The specific personal experience of saying something to another person. Something true about who you are, what you think, what you have figured out about the world, and having that person receive it. Not just acknowledge it, receive it, let it actually arrive. Carol understood this one. Richard kept track because those moments were the substance of what he valued, the problem he solved, and the person he came home to, the explanation given, and the comprehension received. The small daily miracle of being known, genuinely, specifically, in the details of yourself, by the person whose knowing mattered most. This is what we are trying to do in every relationship. This is the thing underneath all the presence and attention and putting down the phone. We are trying to produce the experience in the person we love of being actually received, of having their words land somewhere that recognizes them. Carol understood this one. I want you to think about the person in your life who keeps track of the times you actually listen. Not literally. Most people do not have Richard's notebook, but in the interior accounting that all of us maintain, the register of the times we felt seen versus the times we felt like background. In that register, how are you doing? When your person explains something they care about, are you there? When they describe the problem they solved, or the thing they noticed, or the small observation about the world that is exactly them, are you the Carol understood this one, or are you somewhere else? Because they know the difference. They always know the difference, and the difference is what they are keeping track of, consciously or not, in the notebook that exists in the interior of every relationship. Before you go, and what happens next Tuesday, I want to leave you with something practical. One specific thing. This week, not next month, not when your life is less complicated this week. I want you to be a Carol understood this one. Find one conversation, one exchange with the person or people in your life who most deserve your full attention. And in that conversation, do the thing that Richard was noting in his margin. Actually receive what they are giving you, not the performance of reception, the actual thing, the full attention, the questions that come from genuine curiosity, the comprehension that lands somewhere real rather than bouncing off the surface of a mind that is already somewhere else. One conversation. One Carol understood this one. And then notice what it produces in them and in you. Notice the specific quality of an exchange that is genuinely mutual. Two people actually in the same room, actually reaching and being received, actually present in the unremarkable miracle of knowing and being known. That is what the mornings were, in the ones that were good. That is what Richard was keeping track of. That is what Margaret meant when she said, I just wanted you here. Just here, in the room, receiving what I was giving. You can do that today. In the comments, I want to ask you one thing. Is there a notebook your person is keeping? An internal record of the times you are actually there? What do you think is in it? You don't have to answer out loud. Just sit with the question honestly. And next week, Carol is bringing her daughter. Her name is Sarah. She is 43 years old. And Carol told me on her way out the door today that Sarah is the one who told her to stop talking about Richard so much. I don't know yet what Tuesday looks like with Sarah at the table, but I expect it will be instructive. My name is Dr. Edward Carver. I'll see you then.